17-year-old Kyla Williams stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the perfectly manicured lawns of Riverside Heights. Everything here looked like it came straight out of a magazine. The grass was cut to exact heights, the sidewalks were spotless, and every house had matching mailboxes. It was nothing like their old neighborhood in the city. 3 months ago, her mom got the promotion she had been working toward for years. Dr. Angela Williams was now the new head administrator at Riverside General Hospital. The pay increase meant they could finally afford to live in a nice area with good schools. But nice didn't always mean comfortable, especially when you were one of only 3 black families in the entire subdivision. Kyla missed her old friends terribly. She missed the corner store where Mr. Rodriguez knew everyone's name and would let kids buy candy with loose change. She missed the sound of music playing from different apartments and the smell of her neighbor Mrs. Chen's amazing cooking floating through the hallways. Here everything was quiet. Too quiet. Her older brother Jalen had been so excited about the move before he left for his second deployment overseas. He kept sending her pictures of the house online and talking about how she would have her own art studio space in the basement. "You're gonna love it there, little sis," he would say during their video calls. "And when I get back, we can explore the whole town together." But Jalen wouldn't be back for another 6 months, and Kyla felt completely alone in this new world. The good news was that Lincoln High School had an amazing art program. Kyla had always been talented with drawing and painting, and her art teacher here actually encouraged her to apply for summer programs at the local college. Her grades were solid too, mostly A's with a few B's in math, which had never been her strongest subject. Still, making friends was harder than she expected. Most of the kids at school had known each other since kindergarten. They were nice enough, but there was always this invisible wall. They would smile and say hello, but nobody invited her to hang out on weekends or eat lunch with their groups. The one bright spot in her day was walking their dog, a sweet golden retriever named Buddy. Her family had adopted him from a shelter right before the move, thinking a dog would help them all adjust to the new place. Buddy was friendly and energetic, and walking him gave Kyla a reason to get out of the house and explore the neighborhood. Every evening around 6 o'clock, Kyla would clip Buddy's leash and head out for their routine walk. The neighborhood was beautiful, she had to admit. There were tree-lined streets with names like Maple Avenue and Oak Drive. The houses were all different styles, but somehow looked perfect together. Some had white picket fences, others had stone walkways leading to big front doors. During these walks, Kyla would practice conversations in her head. Maybe she would run into some kids from school, and they would start talking about homework or the upcoming spring festival. Maybe she would meet a neighbor who would wave and ask about Buddy. Maybe this place would start to feel like home. Her mom worked long hours at the hospital, often not getting home until after 8 at night. Her dad traveled for work as a medical equipment salesman, so he was gone 3 days a week. That left Kyla alone most evenings, which is why the dog walks became so important. It was her time to pretend she belonged here. The houses in Riverside Heights all seemed to have stories. There was the blue house on the corner where an elderly woman sat on her porch every afternoon, reading the newspaper. There was the yellow house with the amazing garden where someone clearly spent hours making everything look perfect. And there was the big white house at the end of Oak Drive where expensive cars were always parked in the driveway. Kyla had been living here for 3 months now, and she was starting to recognize patterns. She knew which houses had motion sensor lights that would turn on when she and Buddy walked by. She knew which yards had invisible fences for their own dogs, because Buddy would get excited and strain toward those houses. She even knew which neighbors worked from home, because their lights were always on during the day. What she didn't know was that someone had been watching her too. Every evening when she walked past the gray house on Elm Street, Kyla noticed the curtains in the front window would move slightly. At first she thought maybe they had a cat that liked to look outside. But lately she was getting the feeling that someone was deliberately watching her routes and timing her walks. It made her a little uncomfortable, but she tried to push those thoughts away. Maybe she was just being paranoid because everything here felt so different from home. Maybe the person was just curious about the new family in the neighborhood. Maybe they were thinking about getting a dog themselves and wanted to see how Buddy behaved on walks. Kyla's mom always told her to trust her instincts. But she also didn't want to create problems in their new community. They were still settling in, and the last thing her family needed was drama with the neighbors. Her mom had enough stress at her new job without worrying about neighborhood conflicts. So Kyla kept walking Buddy every evening, sticking to the same routes and times. She told herself that eventually, people would get used to seeing her around. Eventually, someone would strike up a conversation about the weather or compliment Buddy's golden coat. Eventually, this place would feel less like a magazine photo and more like a real home. She had no idea that her regular walking routine was about to change everything. And she had no idea that the person watching from behind those curtains was planning something that would turn her quiet new life completely upside down. It was a Tuesday evening in April when everything changed. Kyla had just finished her homework and was getting ready for her usual walk with Buddy. The weather was perfect, warm enough for just a light jacket, with a gentle breeze that made the new leaves on the trees dance around. She clipped Buddy's leash and headed out, taking their normal route down Maple Avenue toward the small park at the end of the street. Buddy was in a good mood, tail wagging as he sniffed at interesting spots along the sidewalk. Kyla was thinking about her art project that was due next week when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. "Hey,
You there?
stop right where you are." Kyla turned around to see a man walking quickly toward her. He looked to be in his 40s with thinning brown hair and a red face that suggested he was either angry or out of breath from hurrying to catch up with her. He was wearing what looked like a security uniform, a navy blue shirt with some kind of badge pinned to the chest. "Are you talking to me?" Kyla asked, confused. Buddy sensed her tension and moved closer to her legs. "Yeah, I'm talking to you," the man said, stopping about 3 feet away from her. "I'm Dennis Crawford, head of security for the Riverside Heights Homeowners Association. I've been getting reports about someone who doesn't belong in this neighborhood, and I think we need to have a conversation." Kyla's heart started beating faster. "I live here," she said simply, "on Oak Drive. We moved in 3 months ago." Dennis looked her up and down with obvious doubt in his eyes. "Is that right? Well, I'm going to need to see some identification to verify that. We've had problems with people from other areas coming through here, looking for opportunities to cause trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Kyla asked. She couldn't understand what was happening. She was just walking her dog, something she had done dozens of times without any problems. The kind of trouble that happens when people who don't belong somewhere decide to spend time figuring out which houses might be empty, which ones have expensive cars in the driveways, and which ones might be easy targets, Dennis said. His voice was getting louder, and Kyla noticed that his hands were shaking slightly. "I'm not doing any of those things," Kyla said, trying to keep her voice calm even though she was starting to feel scared. "I'm just walking my dog. Look, his name is Buddy. We do this every day." Dennis wasn't listening. "I've been watching you for weeks now. Same time every evening. Same routes through the neighborhood. That's exactly what someone would do if they were planning something. And now you're going to tell me you just happen to live here? What's your address?" Kyla gave him her address on Oak Drive. "You can call my mom if you want. She's Dr. Angela Williams at Riverside General Hospital. Or you can call the school. I'm a junior at Lincoln High." "Anyone can make up a story," Dennis said. "I'm going to need to see actual proof. Driver's license, school ID, something official." Kyla reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her student ID card. Her hands were shaking now and she was trying not to cry. This felt like a nightmare that didn't make any sense. Why was this man treating her like a criminal for walking her dog? Dennis snatched the ID card from her hand and studied it carefully. "This could be fake," he said after a long moment. "These days you can make fake IDs on any computer. I'm going to need more than this." "That's my real school ID," Kyla said. "You can call the school tomorrow and ask them. My student number's right there on the card." But Dennis was already pulling out his phone. "I think the best thing to do is call the real police and let them sort this out. Give me your phone too. I need to make sure you're not texting your friends about which houses look empty." "My friends?" Kyla couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I don't have any friends here yet. And I'm not texting anyone about houses. Can I please just go home?" "Not until we get this figured out," Dennis said. "Hand over your phone, now." Kyla hesitated. Her mom always told her never to give personal items to strangers, but this man claimed to be some kind of security officer, and he was threatening to call the police. She didn't want to get in trouble, especially when her family was still new to the neighborhood. Reluctantly, she handed over her phone. Dennis scrolled through it quickly, then put it in his pocket. "I'm keeping this as evidence until we sort out who you really are and what you're doing here." "Evidence of what?" Kyla asked. "I haven't done anything wrong. That's what we're going to find out, Dennis said. He was already dialing 911. Yes, this is Dennis Crawford with Riverside Heights Security. I need officers to respond to a situation with a suspicious person in our neighborhood. Maple Avenue, near the park. Yes, I'll wait here with the individual until you arrive. Kyla stood there in shock, holding Buddy's leash while this stranger talked to the police dispatcher about her, like she was some kind of dangerous criminal. People in the nearby houses were starting to turn on their porch lights and look out their windows to see what was happening. Can I at least call my mom? Kyla asked when Dennis hung up. You can talk to your mom after the police verify your story, Dennis said. Until then, you're going to wait right here with me. Sit down on that curb. Sit on the curb. Kyla couldn't believe he was ordering her around like this. Sit down, Dennis repeated, pointing to the concrete curb next to the sidewalk. I don't want you going anywhere until the officers get here. Kyla looked around the neighborhood where she lived, where her family had worked so hard to afford a house, where she was supposed to feel safe. Neighbors were watching from their windows, but nobody was coming outside to ask if she was okay. Nobody was telling this man that they recognized her as the girl who lived on Oak Drive. With tears starting to form in her eyes, Kyla sat down on the cold concrete curb and waited for the police to arrive. Buddy lay down next to her, seeming to sense that something was very wrong. She had no idea that this moment would change everything for her family, her neighborhood, and especially for Dennis Crawford, who thought he was so clever and powerful. She had no idea that help was coming, even though it wouldn't arrive for several more weeks. All she knew was that she had never felt more alone or more afraid in her entire life. The police cruiser arrived about 15 minutes later, its red and blue lights flashing in the growing darkness. Kyla was still sitting on the curb with Buddy, feeling humiliated as more neighbors came out to see what was happening. She could hear people talking in low voices on their front porches, and she was sure they were all assuming she had done something wrong. 2 officers got out of the car, a Hispanic woman who looked to be in her 30s and a younger, black man who seemed like he might be new to the job. Kyla felt a tiny bit of relief when she saw the second officer, hoping he might understand her situation better than Dennis had. I'm Officer Martinez, the woman said, approaching Dennis first. You called about a suspicious person? Dennis immediately launched into his story. Yes, officer. I'm Dennis Crawford, head of security for the Riverside Heights HOA. I've been monitoring this individual for several weeks now. She comes through the neighborhood every evening at the same time, walking the same routes, clearly checking out the houses. Tonight I decided to approach her, and she gave me some story about living here, but I don't buy it. Officer Martinez looked over at Kyla, who was still sitting on the curb. And you are? Kyla Williams, she said, standing up slowly. I live on Oak Drive with my parents. We moved here 3 months ago. I was just walking my dog like I do every day. The second officer, whose name tag read Johnson, stepped forward. Can I see some identification? He took my phone, Kyla said, pointing at Dennis. And he has my school ID, too. Officer Martinez turned to Dennis with a confused look. You took her phone and ID, why? Evidence, Dennis said confidently. I needed to secure any evidence of her surveillance activities before you arrived. Sir, unless you're a sworn law enforcement officer, you don't have the authority to confiscate anyone's personal property, Officer Johnson said firmly. Can you return those items, please? Dennis's confident expression started to falter. Well, I'm head of security for the HOA. That gives me certain authorities within the neighborhood. Actually, it doesn't, Officer Martinez said. HOA security positions don't grant you any police powers. You're essentially a private citizen, and taking someone's personal property without their consent could be considered theft. Reluctantly, Dennis handed Kyla's phone and school ID back to her. She quickly checked her phone to make sure nothing was damaged. Officer Johnson looked at Kyla's school ID. This shows you're a student at Lincoln High. What's your home address? Kyla gave them her address on Oak Drive. Officer Martinez wrote it down in her notepad. That's only about 4 blocks from here, Officer Johnson observed. So you were walking from your house toward the park? Yes, Kyla said. I do this every day with Buddy. We usually walk to the park, around the block, and then back home. It takes about 30 minutes. Officer Martinez looked at Dennis. Sir, what exactly did you see this young lady doing that seemed suspicious to you? Dennis seemed less sure of himself now, but he pressed on. Like I said, she's been walking through here every day for weeks. Same time, same routes. That's classic surveillance behavior. Walking a dog on public sidewalks? Officer Johnson asked. In a neighborhood where she lives? She could be lying about living here, Dennis insisted. How do we know that address is real? Officer Martinez was already walking back to the police car. We can verify that right now. She got on her radio and requested a check on the address Kyla had given them. While they waited, Officer Johnson asked Dennis more questions. How long have you been working security for the HOA? About 8 months now, Dennis said. And who hired you for this position? Dennis hesitated. Well, it's more of a volunteer position. I saw that the neighborhood needed better security, so I stepped up to help. So you're not actually employed by the HOA, Officer Johnson pressed. I'm a concerned resident who takes security seriously, Dennis said, his voice getting defensive. Someone needs to keep an eye on things around here. Officer Martinez came back from the car. The address checks out, she told her partner. There's a Dr. Angela Williams registered at that address, moved in 3 months ago. No outstanding warrants, no criminal history. She turned to Kyla. Is Dr. Williams your mother? Yes, Kyla said, feeling relief wash over her. She's the new administrator at Riverside General Hospital. Dennis's face was getting redder. Well, that doesn't prove anything. She could still be here for criminal purposes. Sir, Officer Martinez said, her patience clearly running thin. This young lady lives in the neighborhood, has proper identification, and was walking her dog on public sidewalks. What exactly would you like us to arrest her for? She was acting suspicious, Dennis said loudly. I've been watching her and she's always looking at the houses, checking them out. People tend to look at houses when they're walking through a neighborhood, Officer Johnson said calmly. That's pretty normal behavior. By now, quite a crowd had gathered. Neighbors were standing on their porches and in their yards watching the whole scene unfold. Kyla noticed that most of them were looking at her with curiosity rather than concern, as if she was some kind of entertainment. Officer Martinez closed her notepad. Mr. Crawford, I need to be clear about something. You don't have any authority to detain people, confiscate their property, or conduct investigations in this neighborhood. If you see something that genuinely concerns you, you should call us and let trained officers handle it. But what if she comes back? Dennis asked. She lives here, Officer Johnson said. Of course she's going to come back. And she has every right to walk her dog on public sidewalks. Dennis looked around at all the neighbors watching, clearly realizing that things hadn't gone the way he expected. Fine, he said. But I'll be keeping an eye on things. That's your choice, Officer Martinez said. Just remember what we discussed about your actual authority. The officers got back in their car and drove away, leaving Kyla standing on the sidewalk with Dennis and a bunch of curious neighbors. She felt like everyone was staring at her, and she just wanted to go home and forget this whole nightmare had happened. Come on, buddy, she said quietly, tugging on his leash. As she started walking toward Oak Drive, she heard Dennis call out behind her, I'll be watching you. Kyla didn't turn around. She just walked faster, hoping none of the neighbors would try to stop her and ask questions. She wanted to get home before her mom got back from work. She didn't want to have to explain what had happened because she wasn't even sure she understood it herself. All she knew was that something about Dennis Crawford didn't feel right, and she had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be the end of their encounters. The next few weeks became a nightmare that Kyla couldn't wake up from. Dennis Crawford seemed to be everywhere she went, and he was no longer trying to hide his surveillance of her activities. Every morning when she left for school, Kyla would see Dennis sitting in his old blue sedan parked across the street from her house. He would follow her car at a distance as her mom drove her to Lincoln High, only turning around when they got close to the school parking lot. In the afternoons when she caught the bus home, Dennis would be waiting at the bus stop near their neighborhood, watching as she got off. But the evenings were the worst. Kyla still needed to walk Buddy. The dog was getting restless and anxious when he didn't get his regular exercise. But now Dennis made every walk feel like a police investigation. He would appear from behind trees or from around corners, always with his phone ready to take pictures. Just documenting suspicious activity, he would say loudly, making sure any neighbors within earshot could hear him. Gotta keep our community safe. Sometimes he would follow Kyla and Buddy at a distance of about 20 feet, taking photos and occasionally calling out comments like, "Still checking out those houses. I see or wonder what you're really looking for over there." Other times, he would position himself at the park and wait for her to arrive, then make a big show of talking on his phone. "Yes, she's here again," he would say loudly. "Same time as always. I'm getting it all documented." The worst part was how some of the neighbors started reacting. Mrs. Peterson, who lived in the yellow house with the beautiful garden, used to smile and wave when she saw Kyla walking by. Now she would quickly go inside whenever Kyla appeared on the street. Mr. and Mrs. Chen, an elderly couple who lived near the park, used to let Buddy say hello to their small terrier through their fence. Now they would hurry their dog inside as soon as they saw Kyla coming. At school, things weren't much better. Word had somehow gotten around about the police incident, and kids were starting to look at her differently. Not mean exactly, but with this new wariness that made Kyla feel like she was carrying around a sign that said potential trouble. Her art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, noticed that Kyla's work was becoming darker and more anxious looking. "Everything okay at home?" she asked one day after class. Kyla wanted to explain, but she didn't know how to put it into words. How do you tell someone that a man is following you around your own neighborhood, taking pictures of you for walking your dog? How do you explain that he's making everyone think you're some kind of criminal when you haven't done anything wrong? "Just adjusting to the new neighborhood," Kyla said instead. "It's taking longer than I thought." Her grades started slipping. Not dramatically, but enough that her mom noticed when the progress reports came out. "Your math grade dropped to a C+, Dr. Williams said one evening at dinner. "And your English teacher says you seem distracted in class." "What's going on?" Kyla picked at her food. She had tried several times to tell her parents about Dennis, but every time she started the story, it sounded crazy even to her. A man was following her around taking pictures because he thought she was suspicious for walking her dog. A neighbor was harassing her because he didn't believe she lived in her own neighborhood. Her parents were dealing with their own stress. Her mom was working 12-hour days trying to prove herself at the new hospital. Her dad was traveling more than ever, trying to build relationships with clients in their new territory. The last thing they needed was to worry about neighborhood drama that Kyla couldn't even explain properly. "I think I'm just tired," Kyla said. "The classes here are harder than at my old school." Meanwhile, Dennis was escalating his campaign. He started leaving printed flyers in neighbors' mailboxes with titles like "Neighborhood Watch Alert" and "Suspicious Activity Report." The flyers never mentioned Kyla by name, but they included descriptions that clearly pointed to her. Young female, approximately 16-18 years old, walks through neighborhood daily at 6 p.m., often observed studying houses and taking note of vehicles and security systems. He also started a neighborhood Facebook group called Riverside Heights Safety Network, where he would post daily updates about security concerns. Again, he never used Kyla's name, but the posts were obviously about her. Continued surveillance activity observed on Maple Avenue and Oak Drive. Subject appears to be mapping our neighborhood for unknown purposes. All residents should be vigilant and report any additional suspicious behavior immediately. Some neighbors started engaging with Dennis's posts, sharing their own concerns about people who don't belong and the importance of staying alert. Others seemed skeptical, asking questions like, "Has anyone actually seen any criminal activity? And shouldn't we be welcoming new families to the neighborhood?" But the damage was being done. Kyla could feel it every time she walked down the street. People who used to ignore her now watched her carefully. Parents would call their children inside when she walked by with Buddy. Even the mail carrier started giving her strange looks. The stress was affecting Buddy too. The normally cheerful golden retriever was becoming nervous and jumpy during walks. He could sense Kyla's anxiety, and he didn't understand why their peaceful neighborhood strolls had turned into tense, uncomfortable experiences. One evening in early May, things got even worse. Kyla was walking Buddy down Elm Street when she noticed Dennis taking pictures from behind a parked car. But this time, instead of just following her, he started approaching other neighbors who were outside in their yards. "Excuse me," she heard him say to Mr. Thompson, who was watering his lawn. "I'm Dennis Crawford, Neighborhood Security Coordinator. I wanted to make you aware that we've been having some ongoing surveillance issues in this area. You might want to be extra careful about locking your doors and setting your alarms." Mr. Thompson looked confused. "Surveillance issues? We've had reports of someone conducting suspicious reconnaissance activities," Dennis said, gesturing vaguely in Kyla's direction. Just wanted to make sure you're aware so you can take appropriate precautions. Kyla felt her face burning with embarrassment and anger. Dennis was literally telling her neighbors to be afraid of her while she was standing right there, walking her dog on a public sidewalk. That night, she finally tried to tell her parents what was happening. But even as she told the story, she could see the confusion in their eyes. It sounded unbelievable because it was unbelievable. Why would a grown man spend weeks harassing a teenager for walking her dog? Maybe he's just overly concerned about security, her dad suggested. Some neighborhoods have very active safety committees. But I live here, Kyla said. And I'm not doing anything wrong. Of course you're not, her mom said. Maybe we should try to have a conversation with this man, clear up any misunderstandings. But Kyla knew it wouldn't help. Dennis wasn't interested in clearing up misunderstandings. He was enjoying the power he felt from intimidating her and turning the neighborhood against her. What none of them knew was that Jalen's deployment was ending earlier than expected, and when her big brother found out what had been happening to his little sister, Dennis Crawford was going to learn what real trouble looked like. Kyla was in her room working on homework when she heard her mom scream with joy from downstairs. She ran down to find Dr. Williams crying happy tears while talking on the phone. Yes, we'll pick you up, her mom was saying. Oh my goodness, I can't believe it. Your father is going to be so excited. When she hung up, she grabbed Kyla in a huge hug. Jalen is coming home. His unit completed their mission ahead of schedule, and he'll be at the airport tomorrow evening. For the first time in weeks, Kyla felt genuinely happy. Her big brother was coming home. Jalen had always been her protector, her biggest supporter, and her best friend. When they were younger, he used to walk her to school every day and would never let anyone pick on her. Even though he was 3 years older, he always made time for her and treated her like her opinions mattered. The next evening, the whole family drove to the airport to pick up Jalen. When he walked out of the terminal in his army uniform, Kyla barely recognized him. He had grown even taller during his deployment, and his shoulders seemed broader. His dark skin was tanned from the desert sun, and he carried himself with a new kind of confidence that came from months of serious responsibility. But when he saw his family, his serious military expression melted into the biggest smile. He hugged their parents first, then swept Kyla up in a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. Look at you, he said, setting her down and looking her over. You grew up while I was gone. You look so mature now. I missed you so much, Kyla said, and suddenly she was crying. All the stress and loneliness of the past few weeks came pouring out. Hey, Jalen said, wiping her tears with his thumb. I'm here now. What's wrong? Nothing, Kyla said quickly. I'm just really happy you're home. But Jalen knew his sister better than that. During the drive home, while their parents talked excitedly about his deployment and his plans for the future, Jalen kept glancing at Kyla in the back seat. He could tell something was bothering her. That night, after their parents went to bed, Jalen knocked on Kyla's bedroom door. Can we talk? They sat on her bed like they used to when they were kids, and Jalen asked her to tell him everything about the move, school, and life in Riverside Heights. Kyla started with the good things, her art classes, the nice house, how proud she was of their mom's new job. But eventually the story came out. All of it. Dennis Crawford's harassment, the police incident, the constant surveillance, the neighbors who now treated her like a threat. The Facebook posts, the flyers, the way her grades were suffering because she felt anxious all the time. Jalen listened without interrupting, but Kyla could see his jaw getting tighter with every detail. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How long has this been going on? He asked finally. About a month, Kyla said. Maybe 5 weeks. And Mom and Dad don't know the full extent of it. Kyla shook her head. I tried to tell them, but it sounds so crazy. Who would believe that a grown man is spending his days following around a 17-year-old girl for walking her dog? Jalen stood up and started pacing around her room. Someone who's either mentally unstable or someone who gets off on intimidating kids, he said. Either way, it's not okay. I just want it to stop, Kyla said. I want to be able to walk Buddy without feeling like I'm doing something wrong. You're not doing anything wrong, Jalen said firmly. And it is going to stop. I promise you that. The next evening, Jalen asked if he could join Kyla on her walk with Buddy. She was nervous about Dennis seeing him, worried that it might make things worse somehow. But she also felt safer having her brother beside her. They had only been walking for about 10 minutes when Dennis appeared, just like Kyla knew he would. He came around the corner from Oak Drive, phone already in his hand, ready to take more pictures. But when Dennis saw Jalen, he stopped short. Kyla's brother was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a simple white t-shirt, but something about his posture and the way he carried himself made it clear he was military. "And who's this?" Dennis asked, trying to sound authoritative but not quite managing it. "I'm Jalen Williams," he said calmly. "Kyla's brother. I just got back from serving overseas." "Well, your sister has been causing problems in this neighborhood," Dennis said, pulling out his phone. "I hope you can talk some sense into her about respecting other people's property." "What property has she disrespected?" Jalen asked, his voice still calm but with an edge that Kyla recognized. Her brother was getting angry, but he was controlling it. "She's been conducting surveillance activities," Dennis said, starting to take pictures of both of them. "Walking through here every day, studying the houses, clearly planning something." "Planning what?" Jalen asked. "That's what we're trying to figure out," Dennis said. "But I've documented everything and I've alerted the proper authorities." Jalen stepped closer to Dennis. "What authorities would those be?" "The police, the HOA board, Neighborhood Watch," Dennis said, but he was backing up slightly. "The police already investigated and found no wrongdoing," Jalen said. "What's your position with the HOA?" Dennis hesitated. "I'm the security coordinator." "That's interesting," Jalen said. "Because I called the HOA office today to inquire about the harassment my sister has been experiencing. They told me they don't have a security coordinator. They told me they've never heard of you." Dennis's face went red. "I'm a volunteer security coordinator. Someone has to keep this neighborhood safe." "From what?" Jalen asked. "From a teenager walking her dog?" "From suspicious activity," Dennis said, his voice getting louder. "The only suspicious activity I see here," Jalen said, pulling out his own phone, "is an adult man following around and photographing a minor without any legal authority to do so." He started recording Dennis with his phone. "What's your full name, sir? And can you explain your legal authority for harassing residents of this neighborhood?" Dennis suddenly realized that the tables had turned. Instead of him documenting suspicious activity, someone was documenting his behavior, and unlike Kyla, Jalen didn't seem intimidated at all. "I don't have to answer your questions," Dennis said, but his voice was shaking slightly. "You're right," Jalen said, "but you do have to stop harassing my sister. And if you don't, we're going to have a much more serious conversation." Dennis looked back and forth between Jalen and Kyla, clearly trying to figure out his next move. For the first time since this whole thing started, he didn't seem to know what to say. "This isn't over," he finally muttered, and he walked away quickly. Kyla felt like she could breathe properly for the first time in weeks. Her brother was home and someone finally believed her story. Someone was finally standing up to Dennis Crawford. But she had no idea that things were about to get much more intense. Dennis Crawford spent the next 3 days planning his next move. He wasn't about to let some young soldier intimidate him into backing down from his important security work. If anything, the appearance of Jalen Williams just proved that this family was trouble. Now there were 2 suspicious people walking around his neighborhood. He spent those 3 days researching military regulations online and making calls to people he claimed were official contacts. Dennis was convinced that he could get Jalen in trouble with his commanding officers for threatening a civilian. He didn't quite understand that Jalen was home on leave, not on active duty in the neighborhood. On Friday evening, Dennis decided to make his big move. He had prepared what he thought was a foolproof plan to show everyone that the Williams family was a threat to neighborhood safety. Kyla and Jalen were taking their usual evening walk with Buddy when Dennis appeared at the corner of Maple Avenue and Oak Drive, but this time he wasn't alone. He had brought along 2 other men from the neighborhood, Mr. Foster, who lived 3 streets over, and someone Kyla didn't recognize. "There they are," Dennis announced loudly as he pointed at Kyla and Jalen. "The suspicious individuals I was telling you about." Mr. Foster looked uncomfortable. "Dennis, that's just the Williams girl and her brother. I heard he just got back from overseas." "Exactly," Dennis said. "And what kind of military training did he receive? What if he's been taught combat techniques? What if he's unstable from his deployment?" The third man, who introduced himself as Rick Coleman, seemed more interested in Dennis's conspiracy theories. "So you think they're planning something?" "I know they are," Dennis said confidently. I've been documenting their activities for weeks. They're always walking through here, studying the houses, clearly planning some kind of operation. Jalen stopped walking and turned to face the three men. Good evening, gentlemen. Is there something we can help you with? Yeah, you can help by explaining what you're really doing in our neighborhood, Dennis said, pulling out his phone to start recording. And you can explain why you threatened me the other day. I didn't threaten you, Jalen said calmly. I asked you to stop harassing my sister. That sounded like a threat to me, Dennis said. And I think the military would be very interested to know that one of their soldiers is going around intimidating law-abiding citizens. Rick Coleman stepped forward. We just want to know what your intentions are here. Dennis has shown us some concerning documentation about your activities. Kyla moved closer to her brother. She could feel the situation escalating and she was getting scared. Dennis had brought backup and they seemed to believe his ridiculous story about her being some kind of threat. Our intentions, Jalen said, his voice still calm but getting firmer, are to walk our dog on public sidewalks in the neighborhood where we live. Just like we've been doing for months. That's what you claim, Dennis said. But I've been watching and I've seen the way you study these houses. The way you take note of security systems and expensive cars and driveways. When have you seen me studying houses? Kyla asked, finding her voice. Every single day, Dennis said, getting louder. You walk the same routes at the same times, always looking around, always checking things out. People look around when they walk, Jalen said. It's called being aware of your surroundings. Not like this, Dennis insisted. This is systematic surveillance. And now you're here backing her up, probably planning to use your military training to help with whatever scheme you're planning. Mr. Foster was looking more and more uncomfortable. Dennis, maybe we should just call the police and let them sort this out. I've already called the police, Dennis said. Multiple times. But they don't understand the sophisticated nature of what's happening here. That's when Jalen lost his patience. The sophisticated nature, he repeated, of a teenager walking her dog? Don't play dumb with me, Dennis said, stepping closer to Jalen. I know what I've seen. And I'm not going to let you people turn our safe neighborhood into some kind of criminal operation zone. You people? Jalen said, and Kyla could hear the dangerous edge in his voice that meant he was getting really angry. Yeah, you people, Dennis said, apparently not realizing that he had just crossed a very serious line. People who don't belong here, who come into decent neighborhoods and bring their problems with them. Rick Coleman seemed to realize that Dennis had said something inappropriate. Now hold on, Dennis. There's no need to get into that kind of talk. But Dennis was on a roll now. No, I'm tired of being politically correct about this. We all know what's really going on here. These people move into our neighborhood and suddenly we have to worry about crime and drugs and who knows what else. Jalen took a step toward Dennis. These people? You know what I mean, Dennis said. Urban people. People from the inner city. People who bring their gang mentality into family neighborhoods. That's when Dennis made his biggest mistake. He reached out and grabbed Jalen's arm, as if he was going to physically detain him. Jalen's military training kicked in instantly. In one smooth motion, he twisted out of Dennis's grip, stepped behind him, and had Dennis's arm secured behind his back before anyone could blink. Don't touch me, Jalen said quietly. Dennis was face down on the sidewalk, completely immobilized but not hurt. Jalen had used just enough force to restrain him without causing any injury. Let me go, Dennis yelled. This is assault. He's attacking me. I'm restraining you until you calm down, Jalen said. You grabbed me first. Mr. Foster was already pulling out his phone to call 911. Rick Coleman was backing away, apparently realizing that the situation had gotten completely out of hand. Please don't hurt him, Mr. Foster said to Jalen. I'm not going to hurt him, Jalen said, but he's not going to grab me or threaten my sister anymore. Kyla was recording everything with her phone, her hands shaking, but her mind clear enough to know that they needed evidence of what had really happened. Within a few minutes, they could hear sirens approaching, and this time, when the police arrived, the story they heard was going to be very different from the one Dennis Crawford had been telling for weeks. Mrs. Patterson from the Yellow House was standing on her porch, and she had witnessed the whole thing. So had Mr. Chen from across the street, and the Johnson family from the house on the corner. For the first time since this nightmare began, there were going to be witnesses who saw exactly what Dennis Crawford was really about, and his days of harassing the Williams family were about to come to a very sudden end. When officers Martinez and Johnson arrived at the scene, they found a very different situation than what Dennis Crawford had reported on his 911 call. Instead of a violent military person attacking innocent citizens, they saw a calm young man in military posture holding someone safely, restrained on the ground while several neighbors watched from their porches. "What's the situation here?" Officer Martinez asked as she approached. Jalen looked up but maintained his professional hold on Dennis. "This man grabbed my arm while making threatening statements. I restrained him using nonviolent techniques until you could arrive. He attacked me," Dennis yelled from the ground. "I was just trying to have a conversation about neighborhood security and he assaulted me." Mr. Foster stepped forward nervously. "Officer, I saw the whole thing." Dennis grabbed the young man first. The soldier was just defending himself. Officer Johnson recognized Kyla from their previous encounter. "Miss Williams, you're involved in this too?" "Dennis has been harassing my sister for weeks," Jalen explained. "Tonight he brought other people to confront us while we were walking our dog. When I tried to de-escalate the situation, he made some inappropriate comments and then physically grabbed me." "That's not what happened," Dennis protested. "They're part of some kind of criminal surveillance operation. I've been documenting everything." Officer Martinez looked around at the neighbors who had gathered. "Did anyone else witness what happened here?" Mrs. Patterson stepped forward from her porch. "I saw the whole thing from my front yard. The Williams children were just walking their dog like they do every evening. Dennis and those other men approached them and started making accusations. Then Dennis said some very inappropriate things about their kind of people and grabbed the young man's arm." "What kind of inappropriate things?" Officer Johnson asked. Rick Coleman, who had been trying to back away quietly, spoke up. "Look, I barely know Dennis. He asked me to come witness what he called suspicious activity. But when we got here, he started saying things about urban people and gang mentality. I didn't sign up for that kind of talk." Officer Martinez knelt down next to Dennis. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down so we can sort this out." "Are you injured?" "No, but I want to press charges for assault," Dennis said. "Based on what these witnesses are telling me," Officer Martinez said, "it sounds like you initiated physical contact. Is that correct?" "I was trying to detain a suspicious person," Dennis insisted. "Sir, you don't have authority to detain anyone," Officer Johnson said firmly. "We've already had this conversation with you before." That's when Mrs. Patterson spoke up again. "Officers, there's something else you should know about Dennis. My husband and I have been getting very strange flyers in our mailbox for weeks now, and there's a Facebook group where he's been posting daily reports about the Williams family, claiming they're criminals or something." "What kind of flyers?" Officer Martinez asked. Mrs. Patterson went into her house and came back with a stack of papers. "He's been putting these in everyone's mailboxes. Look at this. Neighborhood security alert and suspicious activity report. He never uses names, but it's obviously about Kyla." Officer Johnson read through the flyers while Officer Martinez continued questioning Dennis. "Mr. Crawford, did you create and distribute these materials?" "I was keeping the neighborhood informed about security concerns," Dennis said defensively. "And this Facebook group?" Officer Martinez asked. "Community safety is everyone's responsibility," Dennis replied. Kyla pulled out her phone and showed the officers Dennis's Facebook posts. "He's been posting about me almost every day for a month. He calls it surveillance activity, but I'm just walking my dog." As the officers reviewed the evidence, a clearer picture began to emerge. Dennis had been conducting his own investigation of the Williams family, based on nothing more than his own suspicions and prejudices. He had been distributing materials that portrayed them as threats without any evidence of wrongdoing. Officer Johnson called for backup to help conduct a more thorough investigation. When additional officers arrived, they began interviewing neighbors systematically. The Chen family confirmed that Dennis had approached them multiple times, warning them to be extra careful when the Williams family was around. The Johnsons said Dennis had asked them to call him immediately if they saw anything suspicious involving the new family. But perhaps most importantly, old Mrs. Morrison from the gray house at the end of Elm Street came forward with information that changed everything. That Dennis boy has been living with his mother for over a year now, she told Officer Martinez. His mother has dementia and she's been getting worse. Dennis lost his job last summer and has been collecting her Social Security checks. I don't think he's supposed to be doing that, He told us he works for the HOA, Officer Johnson said. The HOA? Mrs. Morrison laughed. Honey, we don't even have an active HOA in this neighborhood. It dissolved 3 years ago when the management company went out of business. There's no HOA board, no HOA security, nothing. This revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. Dennis had been claiming authority from an organization that didn't exist. He had been creating fake security, reports and distributing them throughout a neighborhood, where he had no official role whatsoever. Officer Martinez called the Adult Protective Services to check on Dennis's elderly mother. Officer Johnson called the Social Security Administration to report potential fraud. As more details emerged, the full scope of Dennis's deception became clear. He had been unemployed for months, living off his mother's benefits while she suffered from advancing dementia. He had created an elaborate fantasy where he was an important neighborhood security coordinator, and he had focused his delusions on the Williams family because they were new, different and easy targets. Mr. Crawford, Officer Martinez said finally, you're under arrest for harassment, impersonating a security officer, and potential fraud. We'll also be investigating possible elder abuse charges related to your mother's situation. As Dennis was handcuffed and placed in the police car, he was still protesting his innocence. This is a mistake. I was protecting the neighborhood. They're the criminals, not me. But nobody was listening anymore. The neighbors who had gathered were looking at the Williams family with new understanding and embarrassment. Mrs. Patterson approached Kyla and Jalen with tears in her eyes. I am so sorry, she said. I should have known better. I should have spoken up weeks ago when I saw what was happening. Mr. Foster shook his head in disbelief. I can't believe I let him convince me to come out here tonight. I feel terrible about this whole situation. As the police cars drove away with Dennis in custody, Kyla finally felt like she could breathe freely in her own neighborhood for the first time in weeks. But she knew this was just the beginning of getting their lives back to normal. The real work of healing their community was about to begin. The next few weeks brought a whirlwind of changes to Riverside Heights that nobody could have predicted. The truth about Dennis Crawford spread through the neighborhood faster than his fake security reports ever had. And the community was forced to confront some uncomfortable realities about how they had allowed one man's prejudices to poison their environment. Dennis was charged with multiple offenses: harassment, impersonating a security officer, elder abuse for taking his mother's Social Security benefits, and fraud for creating a fake HOA position. His elderly mother was placed in a proper care facility where she could receive the medical attention she needed for her dementia. The investigation revealed that Dennis had been unemployed for over a year and had been struggling with depression and anxiety since losing his job. Rather than seeking help, he had created an elaborate fantasy where he was an important community protector. The Williams family had become the target of his delusions simply because they were new and different. Local news picked up the story, and it became a talking point about racial profiling, mental health, and community responsibility. Fake HOA official targets Black family ran as a headline in the regional newspaper, bringing unwanted attention to Riverside Heights, but also forcing important conversations. The Williams family received an outpouring of support from neighbors who were embarrassed by their silence during Dennis's campaign of harassment. Mrs. Patterson organized a neighborhood barbecue, specifically to welcome them properly to the community. The Chen family brought homemade dumplings and apologized for avoiding Kyla during her walks. Even families that Kyla had never met stopped by with flowers and apologies. We should have spoken up sooner, Mr. Foster told Dr. Williams. I feel ashamed that we let that man make your daughter feel unwelcome in her own neighborhood. But perhaps the most meaningful gesture came from the teenagers at Lincoln High School. When word spread about what had happened, several students approached Kyla with genuine friendship offers. They invited her to join study groups, art clubs, and weekend activities. For the first time since moving to Riverside Heights, Kyla started to feel like she might actually belong there. Jalen used his military leave time to help his sister rebuild her confidence. They continued their evening walks with Buddy, but now neighbors would wave and stop to chat. Children would ask to pet Buddy, and elderly residents would compliment Kyla on what a well-behaved dog she had. You know what the best part is? Kyla told her brother one evening as they walked past the park where Dennis used to lurk with his camera. "I can actually enjoy looking at the houses now. I can appreciate Mrs. Patterson's garden and notice when the Johnsons got new outdoor furniture, and nobody thinks I'm planning a crime." The community also took concrete steps to prevent similar situations in the future. A group of residents organized a real neighborhood watch program with proper training and oversight. They established clear guidelines about what constituted suspicious activity versus normal neighborhood life. Mrs. Patterson started a new neighbor welcome committee to ensure that future families moving to Riverside Heights would receive proper introductions and community support. "Never again," she told Dr. Williams, "will someone feel isolated and targeted in this neighborhood." Kyla's grades improved dramatically once the stress of constant harassment was removed. Her art teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, encouraged her to submit some of her recent work to a regional student art competition. The pieces Kyla created during those difficult weeks, dark, anxious paintings that gradually evolved into brighter, more hopeful compositions, told a powerful story of resilience and community healing. Dennis Crawford was ultimately sentenced to 18 months in jail, with additional probation and mandatory mental health counseling. The judge made it clear that targeting families based on race was unacceptable, regardless of the perpetrator's personal struggles. "Your actions," the judge told Dennis during sentencing, "caused genuine harm to a family that was simply trying to build a life in their new community. Your prejudices and delusions do not excuse the months of harassment you inflicted on a teenage girl." During his victim impact statement, Jalen spoke directly to Dennis in the courtroom. "I served overseas to protect the freedoms that allow families like mine to live wherever they can afford to live," he said. "What you did to my sister was un-American and it was wrong. But I also hope you get the help you need to understand why you did it." Kyla chose not to make a statement in court, but she did write a letter that was included in the official record. In it, she talked about the importance of community members standing up for each other, especially when someone is being targeted unfairly. "I learned that silence can be just as harmful as active participation in harassment," she wrote. "But I also learned that when people find the courage to speak up and do the right thing, communities can heal and become stronger." 6 months after Dennis's arrest, Riverside Heights had transformed into the kind of neighborhood the Williams family had hoped to find when they moved there. Kyla's evening walks with Buddy became social events where neighbors would join them for conversations about school, work, and community events. The fake Facebook group Dennis had created was replaced by a genuine community page where residents shared helpful information about local services, school events, and neighborhood news. Kyla even became one of the regular contributors, sharing photos of Buddy and updates about her art projects. Her relationship with Jalen grew stronger through the experience. Her big brother had proven that he would always protect her, but more importantly, he had shown her how to stand up for herself with dignity and strength. "You know what I'm proudest of?" Jalen told her as they sat on their front porch one evening, watching Buddy play in their yard. "How you handled all of this. You never let his hate make you hateful. You never stopped being kind even when people were treating you unfairly." "I had good teachers," Kyla replied, bumping his shoulder with hers. As the sun set over Riverside Heights, Kyla reflected on how much had changed since that first terrible evening when Dennis Crawford had forced her to sit on a curb while he called the police on her for walking her dog. The neighborhood that had once felt hostile and unwelcoming now felt like home. She still walked Buddy every evening at 6 o'clock, but now those walks represented something entirely different. Instead of being surveillance activities conducted by a suspicious outsider, they were the daily routine of a young woman who belonged in her community and was valued by her neighbors. And Dennis Crawford? He was getting the mental health treatment he should have sought months earlier, learning to deal with his problems without scapegoating innocent families. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a community had learned how to be better, and that, Kyla thought as she watched her neighbors working in their gardens and children playing in their yards, was the most important victory of all.